Adonai ro'i lo echsar. Bino teshe yarbitzeni al mei menuchot, yenahaleni nafshi yeshovei. Yancheni v'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeit samavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan eged sorerai. Dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi revaya ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai v'shavti b'veit Adonai leorech yamin. The Psalm of David. Adonai, God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters, and restores my soul. Guides me on the right path, for that is God's nature. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a banquet for me in the presence of my foes. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. We're here today to say goodbye to Percy Goldberg. In Hebrew, he was known as Pinchas ben Moshe Ufreda, son of Morris Goldberg and Flossie Cohen. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be a blessing. Percy passed away Wednesday, the 23rd day of the Hebrew month of Sivan, in the year 5779. He was 97 years old. We begin with a psalm this afternoon to link this service and Percy's memory with thousands of years of Jewish tradition and the eternity of God. Percy's death marks the end of an era, the last surviving member of his generation, predeceased by his three siblings, Stanley, Eileen, and Adele, as well as his parents and his wife of 61 years, Elaine. He will be deeply missed by his kids, his children, Henny and Rick, Barbara, Patty, Lawrence and Diane, by his grandchildren, Matthew and Kate, Rachel and Adam, Adam and Lexi, Eric, Jonathan, Michael, and Rebecca, by his great-grandchildren, Annie, Whitney, Lila, Charlie, Madden, and Piper, and by his brother-in-law and sister-in-law, Paul and Karen. Saying goodbye is never easy. Young or old, those who depart this life never see enough of the world. They never complete their task, never cherish their loved ones enough. And how we yearn to have them close to us for just one more challenge in our lives, or one more joy, one more precious moment together. And yet we know we are all destined to die. We share that with all who ever live, with all who ever have lived. As it says in Ecclesiastes, there is a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. When that time comes, Jewish tradition teaches us, yes, to mourn, but also to celebrate, to pay respect to the person we've lost by giving recognition to everything we gained while he was alive, to everything he's given to others, which in Percy Goldberg's case is quite a lot. For a man who never boasted a day in his life, who exuded elegance, class, and humility at every turn for nearly a century, it's an honor, a privilege to extol his virtues this afternoon, to share the stories that made him so unique as a family man, as a dentist, and as a friend. Or even the way I'm fortunate to say I knew him. As a devoted synagogue supporter and congregant, a proud Jew, whom I can picture right now in row 11 here on the right side, where he sat year after year for my entire career, for the last 15 years, for the high holidays, until this last year. A fixture, a cornerstone, a staple. We will share stories for which Percy will be deeply missed, but also never forgotten. And it's my honor to call forward Laurie, Percy's son, who will deliver the hesped, the eulogy, the beginning of the sharing of stories as we remember Percy this afternoon. Laurie.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for being with us today. My sisters, Hanny, Barbie, Patty, and I, and those who loved Percy most, did not wait until this moment to reflect on what he brought to the table. We have long appreciated his specialness and savored the gift that he has been to our lives and to the many lives he's touched over almost a century. In 6 weeks, he would have turned 98. That's a big number, an age that evokes a wow. We all want to live a long life with quality, but who really hopes and dreams of pushing up against the century mark? But we have much more to celebrate than a wow for almost 98. There were no medals awarded or books written about him, but Percy was a special person who touched people he encountered in an endearing and indelible way. Percy was not driven by ego. He rarely had the loudest voice in the room or the sharpest wit. He did not seek to be the center of attention. He was a leader by quiet example, an inspiration to those in his orbit. He was modest and deferential, but never a pushover. He was interested, engaged with people and their stories from all walks of life. He was a wonderful conversationalist and a genuine and interested listener. For sure, a dying art. At a wedding, he was always the one to cross the floor and get to know the other family, the one to find the person in the room who had no one to talk to and bring them in. He was gentle and kind. His Standal nephews would refer to their Uncle Percy, aka Uncle Perfect, as low-key, a term of endearment in Standal speak. Percy took things in stride. He was not dramatic. I can't remember him ever cursing. The only time I can remember a flash of anger was when he and I, and then his very young grandson Matthew, were in the locker room at Unicity Racket Club. Percy and Elaine were founding members. And someone, I don't know who, don't remember, took a stool that Matthew was maybe going to sit down on. Percy reacted as if it was aggression on a Pearl Harbor level and snapped at this person in a way that I had never seen. And I don't think Matthew needed protecting. He never has. When my parents moved the family cottage from Winnipeg Beach to Westhock Lake in 1978, the Standals, knowing anything too shiny or showy would cause Percy to squirm, teasingly hammered a signpost onto a tree that broadcast Percy's Bar and Grill. This didn't sit right. Percy quietly removed the sign and replaced it with a signpost that was so low-key. It read B.PHELP, B-Phelp, an anagram of our immediate family's initials. That would prove to be useless to anybody that was ever looking for the Goldberg cottage. I think the Goldbergs as a sign would have been too Jewish for a new family moving into the neighborhood. All of that said, Percy's Bar and Grill sign survived many years as a valued memento, and it's still hammered into the wall of a boathouse, but out of public sight. My dad also had grit and a backbone born of his hardscrabble roots in Depression-era rural Manitoba. He was never comfortable being too comfortable. He could endure a lot. His father, Morris Goldberg, emigrated to the New World on his own, first to the Lower East Side of Manhattan and then to Winkler, Manitoba, where he met his future wife, Flossie Cohn. Morris was a man of commerce who started with a pushcart, selling brooms and sundries to Mennonite farmers. Morris and Flossie left Winkler for the bright lights of nearby Altona, where Morris ultimately chinned himself up to own the Commonwealth General Store. Percy, the eldest, was born in 1921 and was followed by Stanley, Eileen, and Adele. Theirs was one of a handful of Jewish families in Altona. And while I will defer to my Tessler and Standel cousins who may have a different history than I have, I understand that they had happy childhoods, raised among Mennonites and other mostly non-Jewish families. Many years later, my wife Diane and I had the opportunity to meet up with Percy and Elaine in post-war Berlin in the early 90s. It was Percy and Elaine's first time in Germany. As soon as we got into a taxi at the airport, my dad began a conversation with the driver in German, full-on German. He was quite fluent. I was in my 30s and had not known, nor had it ever come up, that he spoke German. I later learned that because of the Yiddish spoken by Percy's parents and their contemporaries, the German spoken in the homes of many of Percy's childhood friends of Germanic ancestry, and the German he later studied at the University of Manitoba during his undergraduate degree, he picked up the language. Interestingly, my dad's recollection of German-Jewish relations in his community during war years was more one of neighbors finding ways to coexist and get along in uncharted, difficult territory. Percy was always looking for consensus over conflict. I could change course now and tell you what a hard ass he was as a father, the demands and pressures he inflicted on me and my sisters. But of course, the very opposite is true. He was always a source of support, never exerting extra pressure. He was never critical or undermining. He left us with foundations of self-esteem. If we had to decide big life questions like what to eat for dinner, he was unable or unwilling to start a sentence with, "I would like." His answer would always be anticipating what he thought we would like. As a kid, my dad was always press an extra $20 in my hand to make sure I had cash in my pocket. It was difficult. He was a tough father. After my grandfather Morris died, I was around 16 years old. Percy went to shul every day for a year. He kept his tallis bag on the front seat of his car. One evening, I was planning to go out with some buddies, and I asked if I could take the car. It was my Uncle Stan's old 1968 Parisian convertible that we had taken over because we had 6 drivers under one roof. It had the big bench seats. My dad said okay, but cautioned me in a much less prescriptive way than I probably would with my kids to take care that his tallis bag was on the seat, even though I was a pretty responsible kid. When I got home late last night, to my horror, the bag was gone. When I had no choice, I woke my dad and fessed up, and he didn't respond with anger or make me feel worse than I already did or that I had abused his trust. Instead, we got back in the car together at midnight and retraced my steps for the evening around the cringe-worthy stops that a 16-year-old in 1970s Winnipeg would have made, to no avail. I don't recall any further discussion on the issue. I can assure you the idea of a teaching moment was not part of the parental vernacular of the day, but his restraint in the moment did teach me a lesson that I hope I've been able to apply in my own parenting. In our life together, my dad and I came to collaborate pretty effectively on many things, mostly family finances, business, and the like. He had sound judgment, and as long as I respected his wait and see, don't rock the boat ethic, he was deferential to my leadership. Not because I was more competent, because he didn't want to undermine me. Until last week, he was completely on top of his bills and balances. Percy went to study dentistry and graduated from U of T in 1946. His years in Toronto were positive and enduring friendships developed. He returned to the prairies and spent the first few years of his dentistry practice back in Altona before setting up permanently at 807 Portage Avenue in Winnipeg. He worked for 47 years and, contrary to stereotype, enjoyed and was rewarded by the practice of dentistry and the people he encountered along the way. When my brother-in-law Rick Corn graduated from dentistry, he went into practice and was mentored by Percy from 1980 until 1993 when Percy retired. Rick continues to practice at 807 Portage today. Many patients knew my dad as Painless Perce. Rick, who knows better than the average lamb who trustingly walks into a dental office, marveled at Percy's chairside manner, technical skill, and especially his rapport with patients. Now I'm going to admit to plagiarizing a few bits that are coming up that I actually wrote and spoke when my mother passed away, but it applies to my father in exactly the same way. The family lore is that Elaine and Percy met in the lobby of the Royal York Hotel the weekend of the 1953 Grey Cup, apparently introduced by my uncle Stan Goldberg. Although the Bombers lost to Hamilton that day, the rest of the weekend must have been epic. They were married 4 months later, and in less than 5 years, they'd pumped out 4 kids. Family was at the core of Percy's being. He and Elaine raised us in close proximity to our Zeta Morris and all of our first cousins, the Teslers, Standals, and from my mother's side, the Mortons, with whom we've had, from generation to generation, maintained and evolved wonderful relationships. When we were young, my dad loved to put us in the car for family road trips. Quickies across the line to Grand Forks, Fargo, Minneapolis, and then big cross-country expeditions to Vancouver, Washington, New York. My parents loved those years, 6 of us in a sedan. The kid in the front middle seat had the privilege of lighting my dad's cigars and getting the first few puffs. The kids in the back cracking sunflower seeds, plowing through Archie comics. We'd pull into a motor hotel after a day on the interstate. The kids would play in the swimming pool, and Percy and Elaine would pour a cocktail. At the core of our family was a truly great relationship between my parents. It wasn't just a long marriage, 1 month shy of 62 years, but one filled with lasting love and affection and caring for each other and their family. My mom met my dad at the door with a kiss every night when he came home from work, and I can attest to the fact that he delivered Elaine coffee in bed every morning for 62 years. In his old age, his enduring gift to those in his everyday life was his spirit and positive disposition. After my mom died, even though his illnesses were catching up with him and his world was getting smaller, he daily reported with conviction that he'd had a good day. He was active and athletic his entire life, an ethic bred in the bone of his kids and grandchildren. He took us along when he jogged laps in the field beside our cottage at Winnipeg Beach and at Lipset Hall track long before there was a running and fitness revolution. He played tennis and golf his entire life, and in later years, he and my mom particularly liked to play 9 holes together at twilight. He was an accomplished curler. He skipped the winning rink in the 1966 Maple Leaf Bonspiel, which back in the day was a big enough deal to be above the fold on the front cover of both the Free Press and Tribune sports pages. Over the last 15 years or so, his twice-a-week workouts with his trainer Jackie Doby were the cornerstones of his schedule. He also pushed himself to walk daily laps around his apartment to keep his strength and mobility. Although he often claimed he was a fatalist, he worked hard to neutralize the effects of Parkinson's, and that, combined with good luck, was able to keep the disease under control for more than 20 years. He'd listened with interest to the comings and goings of our lives and the accomplishments of his grandchildren. He had independent and loving relationships with all of his 7 grandchildren. They called him regularly and visited often, and he tracked their progress with love and pride. His 6 beautiful great-grandchildren have been an added bonus in his life. To all who knew him, he was a model of how to live and age gracefully. Many people relied on his wisdom and good judgment. He was fiercely independent, never uttered a complaint, always put his own needs last. He was even-keeled and patient, modest and dignified. He loyally supported the Jets and the Bombers his entire life, and the Raptors for 2 weeks this spring. He read widely and was intellectually engaged until the very end. Everything in moderation was an expression he used and lived his life by. As his strength declined, there were many people who stepped in to care for him and even watched Jets games with him, and for whom he became a respected and trusted friend. My sisters and I are indebted to Edith Mendoza, Marianne Cuevas, Lenora Mamarno, and Maria Taflin for their tender care for many years, and most recently for Jasmine Lamson and Isaac Okunola, and most notably as well to Dr. Kevin Coates for his exemplary care for my father. We loved our father and grandfather deeply. We're very sad that this day is upon us and it's time to say goodbye. But we are so lucky to be able to celebrate a full and healthy life of almost a century. He will stay with us always.
Thank you, Lori. The beautiful eulogy. I'd now like to call up Adam to speak on behalf of all the grandkids.
Good afternoon. I am one of Percy's 10 grandchildren. To me and the other grandkids, he was known as Zeta. Zeta also proudly wore the title of great-grandfather to 6 great-grandchildren. However, to all of us, he was so much more than just that. He was a leader, a mentor, a friend, a bank, a listener, and a teacher. He was our family pillar. I can safely say that on behalf of all the grandkids, we looked up to Zeta and strived to be a portion of the person that he was to us. With that being said, I asked the other grandkids to share some of their most fond memories of Zeta. I want to share some of those thoughts and stories that I believe capture just how special and incredible of a man our Zeta was. Zeta was a true gentleman. He made an impact on anyone who was lucky enough to cross paths with him, whether you're a close friend or just a stranger on the street. One of us actually compared Zeta to portraying the same uncanny ability that Bill Clinton contains. And that is the ability to make you feel like you're the most interesting person in the room when you and he were speaking. Boy, how lucky is Bill to be in a class with Percy Goldberg. Zeta was the kind of man that would do anything for his kids and grandkids. Some would say he's the kind of guy that would take the shirt off his back for you. My recollection is he's the kind of guy that would take the shoes off his feet for you. You see, Zeta had a gorgeous pair of brown tassel loafers, and about 12 years ago at dinner, I told him how much I liked them. And before I could get the next word out, Zeta said, "You know what, they're a little too tight on you, or too tight on me, they're yours." Finally, after going many rounds of back and forth saying I couldn't, I finally gave in and accepted his offer. However, I did draw the line and did not let him drive himself and my grandma home in -30 winter in January in just his socks. Sure enough, before that weekend was over, Zeta hand-delivered his brown tassel loafers, freshly polished a boot, which I still wear with pride to this day. This take the shirt off your back mentality was challenging for many of us, as Zeta had such a sartorial way about him, and always dressed with such style and ease. We were constantly tethering the line of complimenting on his style, but not crossing out of fear he'd be left in nothing but his underwear at the end of the night. Many of us recall memories of Zeta at West Sauk Lake. Let me share some of the most notable. Early mornings when we were younger, Zeta would gather all the kids around and take us to Major's to grab the newspaper and in tow, buy us all candy. 8 a.m. candy with Zeta. That you can't beat. Also, not a very dentist thing to do, but that's the point, anything for his grandkids. Being somewhat still a new father, I realized that this was not about grabbing the newspaper or spoiling our breakfast with candy, but rather was his way of giving us, his own kids, a chance to relax on their weekends by entertaining us kids for just a little bit. Once again, another example of how Zeta was always putting others first. We have fond memories of the measurement wall. Every official start of summer commends with us grandkids gathering in the back room while eagerly taking our turn to be measured by Zeta to compare how much we had grown from the previous year. Regardless of how much or how little one grew, Zeta had a very special way of making each of us feel like we were walking out as the tallest person in the room. The annual routine also came with some confusion. For years, Matthew walked around telling people he was 6'3". Once again, just another example of Zeta, always looking to give us grandkids some inches in life. We recall Zeta standing on top of the boathouse, watching us water ski past the dock, and the highlight was always looking over to Zeta and seeing his ear-to-ear grin, yelling, "Hooray, hooray." Zeta's concept of working out was different than what Lori recalls, from what at least the grandkids recall. See, very different from our generation of going for long runs and long swims. Rather, Zeta's idea of cardio was making his way up and down our long set of stairs, going from the cottage to the shed to the boathouse with a pair of shears, clipping the grass and the trees, followed by a broom to sweep the clippings off the stairs. We were always shocked how often the edges of the grass and the trees needed to be clipped over the course of a weekend. Looking back now, we realize that this was just Zeta's way of earning his Coors Light with lunch and his mid-afternoon cigar. I can speak for at least Matthew and me and say we've carried some of these traits on with us. Less so the manual labor, more so the Coors Lights and cigars. Sticking with the trends of the finer things of life, Zeta introduced some of us to our taste for Scotch. As recently as this past Passover, Matthew, Kate, Lexi, and I sipped a Scotch with Zeta in his family room, getting caught up on life as the way we always would. Naturally, he was dressed perfectly in gray slacks and a crisp blue shirt, looking like the true sartorialist that he was. Jonathan, Rebecca, Michael, and Eric shared a similar experience, chatting with Zeta about the Jets, school, and most recently, his newfound appreciation for basketball and the Raptors at the ripe age of 97. Earlier, I described Zeta as our bank, and that's because he had the uncanny ability to once remind you that money does not grow on trees, while coolly at the same time slipping you a $50 bill or $50 bills to spend on someone or something special. We recall the never-ending battles of letting Zeta know that a carton of milk does not cost $100, in which his response was always, "We will need more milk later on the weekend and hold on to that change for when that time comes." Sure enough, when that time came, a new crisp bill was slipped into our hand. It's no wonder that us grandkids were always fighting to do the errands. He was probably onto something. I want to remind you once again who Zeta was for all of us. A leader, a mentor, a friend, a listener, and a teacher, our family pillar. We were all so fortunate to have Zeta in our lives, whether it was for a short 11 months or 38 years. It is quite clear that each one of us will take many of his traits and carry them on throughout our lives while continuing to pass on to the next generation. There is no doubt that we are all better people because of him. The only thing good about this day is knowing that this morning, Grandma woke up to saltine crackers and hard butter, a small cup of OJ, and coffee served in bed by Zeta. And that tonight, she'll enjoy her martini straight up as Zeta sips a watered-down Glenlivet Scotch on the rocks and puffs a big old cigar. On behalf of all of us, Zeta, we love you. You are a collective hero. You will be missed.
Well done, Adam. Beautiful reflections on a beautiful man. So many lessons in the stories that have been shared today. Lessons on how to get the most out of life, on how to live. I think we can all agree Percy Goldberg did life the right way. One of the expressions that came up in our meeting yesterday, the family and myself, is he used to ask rhetorically, why do I do things? Because I can. But when he said that, he knew he wouldn't be able to say it forever. But never worried about that, never worried about when the time would come. He just kept living. And, as has been documented well today, he lived in a way that allowed those around him to shine, feeling better about themselves. To make someone feel special from talking to you is the mark of someone truly special. Of all the words Lori has used and Adam has used, the only word I can add that hasn't been brought up is a word we use in Judaism, in Jewish tradition, to be a mensch. If Percy Goldberg is a mensch, I think even those among us who consider us to be as well may have a little room to grow. He's an inspiration to family, friends, and community, and someone whose memory will endure as a blessing for generations to come. 3 loving, beautiful generations, all stemming from him, and will set the stage for many, many more. He will be missed. I invite you to rise now for the memorial prayer, the El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShekhinah, B'malot Kedoshim Uteorim, Kezohar Arakia Mazhirim, and Nishmat Pinchas ben Moshe Ufreda Shalach Leolamo, Began Eden de Menuchato, Anabal Harachamim, Hastireu Beseter Kenafecha Leolamim, Utziro Bitziro Rachaim Enishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuach b'shalom Amishkavo V'namar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Percy Goldberg, Pinchas, son of Moshe, Morris, and Freda, Flossie, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Please be seated. Our sages, the masters of Jewish tradition, teach that there really is no higher form of respect, no greater mitzvah, no greater commandment than to accompany a loved one to his final resting place. Which is why our service will conclude in a moment here at the synagogue, but continue with a trip to the cemetery for interment. Shara Zedek Cemetery, 230 Armstrong Avenue. You're invited to follow us as we'll be driving in caravan fashion to the cemetery with our 4-way flashers on. We will keep stopping for red lights along the way. After our visit to the cemetery, there will be a meal of consolation as our thoughts turn from honoring Percy to comforting the mourners, his family members left behind to grieve and to remember. The meal will be at Henny and Rick's home, 622 Park Boulevard West. I should mention that as far as timing goes, in case you don't want to go to the cemetery, but you do want to go to the meal, it's usually about an hour and a half from when we leave the synagogue to when the family gets back for the meal, maybe a little longer since they're going home. So just to be aware of that. In a moment, I will ask those family members and pallbearers to leave by way of the chapel. And then when we open the doors at the back of the sanctuary, I'd ask all of you to help us observe a custom we have here at Shared Zedek, of forming 2 rows on the steps leading out of the building and onto the driveway. 2 rows of familiar faces, of friendship and love, through which the casket may pass. Another symbol of accompanying Percy to his last stop. Shiva will be observed in both Winnipeg and Toronto. In Winnipeg, at Henny and Rick's home, again 622 Park Boulevard West, Sunday from 1 to 4 in the afternoon and 7 to 9 in the evening. In Toronto, it'll be at Laurie and Diane's home, 226 Stibbard Avenue, Monday and Tuesday evening, both from 7 to 9. The final thing to say to the family is, Hamakom yinachem etchem, betoch sha'arav elei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May you be comforted and consoled. May God comfort and console you among all those who mourn and who have ever mourned in our community. Thank you again to everyone for coming this afternoon, for joining your hearts together with Percy's families. I invite the pallbearers and family members to leave first. Thank you again.